Hey guys, so this is my my old Trac vac attachment that went on the back of the GT17 Ariens tractor. It came with the tractor back when I bought it way back when, and I actually used it quite a bit initially and then stopped using it, and it just sat over there near the wood line for years being neglected. And of course when I went to use it again, I found that the years of just sitting out there in the elements had taken its toll, mainly on the carburetor. I already took the carburetor off of this thing. My intention was I was going to clean the carburetor, but once I got the carburetor off and looked at how much rust and corrosion was in that carburetor, I quickly decided that I should check and see just how expensive it was for a replacement carburetor. And as is typical with many of these small engine carburetors, a cheap Chinese replacement was easy to find online. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that Chinese carburetor on here and hopefully it'll work well. We'll see. But the other problem I had with this thing was I started working on this earlier when it was still warm out, and I had discovered, much to my dismay, that wasps were going in and out underneath this housing. So they apparently have built a nest inside here. There's no activity right now. That's either because they moved on to greener pastures, or they're just dormant because it's getting cool now. When I woke up this morning at a little after 6 a.m., it was 34 degrees out. So, I mean, we're almost into mid-October, so I shouldn't be surprised. But anyways, let's start by taking the shroud off. I also suspect that there's no spark, and I think it's probably because there's rust on the flywheel, and that it has basically, the rust is built up to a point where it is scraping on the magneto. Oh! Yep, they're still in there. They're just chilling out. Literally. Oh, there it is right there. Oh yeah, they're not happy. I should have got that one before he crawled away. There he is. 2. Alright, so my video card filled up right when I was taking this off, so I don't know how much of the carnage you guys were able to see, but basically this nest was in right underneath here, and there was, probably about a dozen hornets in here on this nest that were in their semi-dormant, getting ready for winter stage, which made them rather easy to kill. That is all rust. Big flakes of rust. So, what happens on these motors if they've been sitting for a while, or what can happen, is that enough rust will actually get on this flywheel here and cause the air gap between this part right here, which I believe is called the magneto, will cause, or an ignition coil. I don't know, I always wondered about that. Technically I don't think it's a magneto. Anywho, if you get enough rust on here and it gets stuck in this, the oxide gets stuck in this air gap right in here, then you won't get spark. I could tell you that. Well, that tape was doing a good job of sealing the intake. I had a piece of tape over the intake just to keep stuff from flying in there over the summer. We definitely got compression, and this doesn't seem too bad. As long as I've got the cover off, I'm going to take a moment to just clean this up a little bit. Alright, so theoretically now I should be able to get some spark out of this thing. Now, one of the things that I've never really liked about this setup on this track vac is that, I mean, it might be actually a good thing, but the impeller is just mounted right on the crankshaft. It's direct drive. There's no slip coupling or anything. I guess I would be asking for too much if there was some way that the impeller wasn't engaged when you were trying to start this thing, because basically you've got this large mass of this big metal impeller assembly that you got to get spinning to start this thing. And there is, as far as I can tell, there is no compression release. This is not an overhead valve engine. This is an L head. So there's no compression release mechanism built into it. So it's not like you're gonna get any help there. So I'm gonna uncover my port here, my intake port, take this tape off so it doesn't get, in case it comes off and gets sucked into the engine. So now let's see how that sounds. I had already taken the cover off on the other side and exposed the impeller, and the reason for that is because that was full of just garbage that mice and or chipmunks or other furry little creatures had brought in there to make their home. Oh, you see, I should have addressed that while I had this off. Alright, that's going to drive me crazy. Alright. A few spurts there of PB Blaster, and that now goes back in, so that's nice. Now this wire right here is the wire that goes to the ignition coil and is responsible for being the kill switch. I believe that wire, when it's grounded, kills the engine, so we should have no spark if I ground that. So if it's just disconnected from the carburetor linkage like it is now, I should have spark. Of course, I could be wrong. Let me get a jumper wire. Might be the other way. Oh, I could look at the old carburetor. No, it's actually not the carburetor at all I wanted to look at. It's this linkage that bolted on the side. So right here is where that wire hooks on, and there's that little contact. So what happens is, when this upper switch, which is the throttle, when this switches all the way over to stop, that makes contact and grounds that switch out to the case. So the rest of the time it's ungrounded, so therefore that means with this wire disconnected we should be getting spark right now. I don't have a spark tester, so it's kind of hard for me to hold this and watch the spark while I'm spinning this. Maybe I could get one of the kids to come out and hold on to it. Just kidding. Who hasn't done that trick? My kids won't fall for that. Not anymore anyways. Yeah, I don't think I'm getting any spark. Oh, look at that. Oh yeah. Great. Pull the spark plug out, which eliminates the compression, so, or most of it. So that'll let me spin this a lot easier, so I can use my handy dandy little adapter and going clockwise, and I can get this thing zipping. Well, there's your problem. No spark at all. If there's no wire going from this coil down behind into the motor, then there are no points in there. Let me take this magneto off of here. See, I forgot to mention something else about rust. The other thing that can happen is, if I recall correctly, I believe there is a place in here where there's supposed to be a gap that can get filled with rust, and basically it raises heck with the the generation of the magnetic fields, or I don't know, you know, it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Now, didn't I just try that? Put it on wrong, idiot. That dropped right down because I happen to have it, the flywheel in the position where the magnet is. So we know it's got a good strong magnet in the flywheel. That ain't what's going on. Yeah, there's no, what's wrong with you, Steve? There's no flipping points in this thing. They call me crazy. But I've seen motors where you take this flywheel off and there's a little metal cover underneath there, and underneath that metal cover there are breaker points and a condenser. This isn't one of those animals. Oh, this doesn't look good at all. Okay, so that little gap I was talking about is right here on the top. You can barely see it. There's actually a little line right there. And there's actually a gap between this side of the metal frame, which is the core, and this side. And on this particular coil, there is some sort of material actually wedged in there. And I'm going to take a wild guess that that material is, and its job is, it's supposed to keep that gap from being able to close up. But I'm wondering whether or not we've just got so much oxide on the top here that it's kind of not able to do its job anymore. I mean, I'm really grasping at straws here. This is in such bad shape, this really probably would warrant replacement altogether. It's kind of interesting here too, this little area right here on the coil. Huh. I remember seeing that on other coils. And on the back side here, we can see the wires coming out of the coil. They just terminate right there. There you go, sir. Right here, there's 3 wires that come out of the back of the coil, and they go right up to this little point right here, and they appear to be tied together at that point. And then over here, on this end, they appear to be tied together to this this connection right here, which is the wire that goes over to the kill switch. Ha 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 ha. What do you make of that? Alright, I scraped the heavy oxide coating off of the top here, right down to the where I could see that insulator material really well, and then kind of scraped that a little bit. Cleaned up the ones on the bottom here too. I'm going to reinstall this, but I got to set the air gap. As far as what this is supposed to be set to, I don't remember. So I just grabbed 10 and a 12 thousandths gauge, and oh, that's the wrong way. This goes this way. It's actually marked on here. It's marked right on the coil that this is the cylinder side. So it's real high tech here. Put these feeler gauges in here. Lightly snugging these up, and now I'm going to pull these out. That one's just coming out easy. This one's a little. There we go. See if that rubs. That seems alright. This will whirl. We'll see what happens. And we have spark. Probably going to be asking for trouble if I try and spin this with the drill, but yeah, what the hell. I kept my spark. Probably just don't have enough fuel in there to make anything happen. Yeah, I'm still getting sparks, so I just need to get my carburetor on there, and I think we might be able to make this live. Panel. I'm going to work on this this Trac vac leaf blower system that I've been working on, and I haven't worked on it in a while, and the reason is we had a major parts problem. So originally what happened with this Trac vac was I had left it out in a wooded area of the property, and water had gotten into the fuel system. So cutting to the chase, the gist of it is that I made a mistake because I knew this carburetor was junk because of the amount of corrosion that I can see here on this tube. And I just figured, okay, I'm just going to buy a replacement carburetor, Chinese made, which I did for about 23 or 26 bucks off of eBay. I shouldn't have bothered buying this carburetor until I was sure I could reuse this tank, because it turns out the big problem is the tank. I tried washing this tank in the parts cleaner, and when I was rinsing it out, just giant chunks of rusty metal were coming out of the tank. The tank is kaput. The tank is unique because the carburetor style, this type of carburetor is what's called a pulse jet carburetor. All right, so for those of you who are not aware of what a pulse jet carburetor is, this carburetor has a vacuum actuated diaphragm pump right here. This is a fuel pump. The way this carburetor works is this long tube right here that dips down deep into the tank. Fuel is drawn up through this tube by the pump. Now, in order to make sure that the carburetor doesn't have too much fuel being pumped through it, what they do is they have this thing constantly, while the engine's running, drawing fuel up, and the fuel dumps out of that slot right there. So right there, there's a slot. Right here. The fuel dumps out of this area. There's actually an opening. There's actually an opening right here. And the fuel comes out and dumps out of here. Now, you might think, well, why? What's the point of that? Why pump the fuel up and just dump it right back out here? Well, when this dumps out here, where it goes is it dumps into a cup. Right here, there's a metal cup that's actually part of the tank. It's bonded to the underside of this metal right here. So this little cup right in here is like a little tiny fuel tank. Or it's like a bowl on a carburetor, right? So what happens is, as that fills up with fuel, because this is constantly pumping that fuel in there, and the fuel level gets too high, it dumps over this wall right here and goes back into the tank. So the effect is that you constantly have this filled with fuel. Back on the carburetor, we have a second pickup tube that actually sits in that cup and draws its fuel. So if you have a problem with one of these engines where it's very hard to start, you want to check this, because on this one right here, the walls are like paper thin because the metal's so corroded, but there are holes rotted right through it. So I could put my finger right through, all the way through to the main tank, which you're not supposed to be able to do. It's completely rotted out. So the idea is that when this engine is working properly, it should be able to start in about 5 pulls. Because 5 pulls should be enough for it to be able to draw, just through the vacuum of the engine, up through that little tube, fuel through the system. The engine starts running, the vacuum pump starts operating, pulls fuel up and starts dumping large quantity of fuel in here and keeping this full all the time. And that's basically how this pump works. How this carburetor works. It's actually a pretty reliable design. So the problem is the tank. All right. So this design is very similar to what a lot of old lawnmowers used before they started going to mostly float bowl carburetors, where you actually have a little float, you have a bowl that fills up with carburetor from gravity from the fuel pump, and then as the bowl fills up, this float lifts up and closes a little needle valve, and that's how you regulate how much fuel stays in the bowl. Well, Before they went to all that, they used this type of setup, this type of carburetor on a lot of lawnmowers. But lots of times the tanks are small. I happen to have an old tank. Here's an example of one of these old tanks off an old Briggs & Stratton, like 2 or 2.5 horse lawnmower. So it's a small tank. The leaf blower, we need more capacity. So this is a 2-gallon tank. So you'll notice that the tank's got kind of a unique shape to it on the top here. It's also got this bracket, okay, which this bracket bolts to a threaded hole at the base of the engine. This bracket does two things. This bracket helps support this tank, which, you know, it's a metal tank, and when it's filled with 2 gallons of fuel, you don't want this thing with vibration and everything just hanging off of the screws of the carburetor. So it supports it, but it also has some of the mechanism for the governor. So this tank is obsolete, and because apparently they use a lot of these little 5-horse engines on go-karts and stuff, this tank's actually in high demand. So you have a problem where you have no tanks, not a lot of these tanks left in good condition, and demand for them, and guess what? Prices go up. So on eBay, prices are a little scary on these. Also, I want to note, this uses the bayonet style cap that just, it's got 2 slotted holes here, no threads. The older tanks used, like what was on that tank I just showed you. The older tanks used to screw a metal cap that's screwed onto threads, like this. The reason why I mention that is because when we look at eBay, just to see how crazy these tanks have gotten, I want you to keep that in mind. So the problem I was seeing on eBay was the fact that I was seeing stuff like this. Here's one right here. This is the first, sorting these from lowest to highest in price. That's a small tank like the one I showed you a moment ago. This is the first one that looks like it might even remotely be able to be the correct tank, but it's got a metal cap, so it's an older one. And, you know, it's got 2 days and 4 hours left. It's got 8 bids on it, so there's plenty of action on it. It's already up to $26 plus $19.65 shipping. So this is well on its way to being over $50. The next one, that's with the carburetor. Next one down is just a tank. Again, you can see it's a pretty old one, metal cap. There's the first one that actually looks like, other than being red, it looks like my tank. It's got a plastic cap. So that's the first one that looks like it might actually be a close match for my tank. It's got the plastic cap, although it's painted red. That's got 8 bids on it. It's already up to $36 with $21.85 shipping. So that's on its way to being over $60. But I was already aware of this because I had looked at previous auctions. You know, $40 plus $12 shipping, $42 plus $11 shipping. There's a pretty clean looking one there, but it sold for $65 plus $19 shipping. So needless to say, I was pretty disheartened by the fact that I felt that I had wasted my money on buying this carburetor, that I wasn't going to make this work. I started thinking about, well, how could I make this, you know, how could I do something else with this thing? I thought about the idea, I've got a plastic tank. I actually thought of maybe making like an adapter plate, but then I'd have to make that cup assembly that we talked about for the pulse jet carburetor to work. So I was kind of pretty disheartened. And then this weekend at the Thompson International Speedway in Thompson, Connecticut, they had a swap meet. And I knew that there's a lot of guys that haul a lot of junk out there, not just racing stuff. So sure enough, I was walking around. I went last night, which was day 1, and I was walking around and I spot this 4 horsepower Briggs motor. Now my motor's a 5, but on this 4 horsepower Briggs motor, I see what looks like the same setup as what I had on my 5 horsepower. And I asked the guy how much he wanted for it. And he says, well, it's not running right now. He says he thinks the carb needs a cleaning or yada, yada, yada. He wanted $40 for it. And I was actually able to get him to come down to like 15 or 20 bucks on this thing. So actually, I think it was 15 bucks. So let's go take a look at that motor and see how well I did. Because of course I'm buying it. I'm just going by memory whether or not it looks like the right one. Alright, so here it is. My $15 or $20 cream puff of an engine. It's a it's badged Craftsman, so I don't know what it came out of. But it's definitely, it's made by Briggs & Stratton. But I mean, if you didn't see this, and you were just looking at this, it's almost the same setup. This plate right here with the choke, the combination choke accelerator is the same. On mine, this cover right here for the air filter is plastic, but the base plate is metal. It has the plastic cap, so the newer style. It has some gas in it right now. There is some corrosion visible, and we'll have to see how bad it is. I'm hoping I didn't, end up with another piece of junk. The only way to really know for sure, unlike the other one where there was like big chunks of just flakes of rust in there, this doesn't look anything like that. But the only way to know for sure is to drop this tank down off the carburetor and look in that little bowl. So anyways, this actually isn't frozen, it turns over. The other thing that's nice is the pull cord is actually in pretty good shape. So I'm actually going to rob the pull cord off this one because the one on mine is all frayed. It looks like it's ready to snap at any second. But more importantly, how does it look this way? Now, I could see it's smaller. So how do you like them apples? Looks like I need a sound effect here. Wah, wah, wah. Man, this looks so promising. You could see how I would have, not having this with me, how I would have mistaken this for this. So this must be, I think they call this a 3-quart, maybe. I don't know. But height-wise, this might still work. He said, hopefully. Oh, there's some good news. Looking down in the throat of this carburetor, it looks very clean. Looks like we got another issue. There's a slight difference in the look of the lever for the governor. So, I don't know if that's going to follow us up. But first things first, let's see whether or not, if I put this on and hold it in the position of where it's supposed to bolt on for the carburetor, whether or not that hole is going to line up. That'll tell me whether or not the distance from the center line of the throat of the carburetor to the center line of that bolt hole is the same on the two. Now let's see. Might be able to still make this work. This lever for the governor on this engine actually looks, it's covered with grease, but it looks very similar to this lever on here. But since the distance from this lever to the carburetor is closer than on this one, this rod is not going to work. So I'll just use the old rod. Also, the governor's spring, that's on the bracket on the back of this old tank, it's longer. It's got a longer piece to it. The actual amount of spring area is about the same, so the tension should be about the same. So I took the spring off of this one and I put it over on this one. The problem's going to be, I think, that this part right here that the spring attaches to is going to be up higher. Well, so maybe I do want the other spring on there. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out if I can get this to work in every way, with the only issue being that this doesn't line up with the hole below it. Because if that ends up being the only issue, I can make a bracket to actually attach to this, just a piece of metal that it would extend on this and allow me to bolt it up. So, also my little breather tube was dry rotted and damaged. I had this turned down like this just to keep rain from being able to get in there, but it's supposed to be actually up in this position here. So hopefully the breather is the same size on that one. I can just switch the breathers complete. If not, I'll have to try and carefully remove this rubber piece from that breather and swap it over. Well, that's one piece of good news. That actually seems to fit perfectly fine. Well, this is another failure. This just isn't going to work. The problem I've got is because of the fact that this bracket is actually located up much higher. It's not just that this rod is a different length. It's the fact that the linkage between this bracket and the governor arm that happens through this spring, because they're so close together now that even with the shorter spring on there, this has actually absolutely no effect. So there's no way for this governor to be controlled by the throttle. So effectively what happens is when the governor is operating, so the governor is constantly trying to hold this close. So when the engine's running, this lever is pushing up like that. And then through this spring, the throttle linkage, which is this linkage here, moving this bracket, is supposed to pull against the governor arm. So if oh, by the way, this also is different to set up here, but I could live with just having to have a separate way to do the throttle over here. So when I pull this throttle linkage, and I actuate the throttle linkage, it doesn't do anything to put any kind of force on the governor arm. So that's that. Can't use this thing.